The Carolina Panthers are finalizing a deal with Buccaneers offensive coordinator Dave Canales as its new head coach. To help us break down the hire, we welcome Locked On Panthers host Julian Council. All right, Julian, overall, he brings 14 seasons of NFL coaching experience, and within the last 12-month span, he's jumped from Seahawks quarterbacks coach to Bucs OC to now head coach of the Carolina Panthers. What do you make of David Tepper's decision to go this direction the third time around?
I think Dave Canales is a great hire, but I have no idea, Ashley, if it's going to work here in Carolina. There's still plenty of issues as far as the roster goes. We know David Tepper and how involved he's been in the process to bring in coaches, to fire coaches, to bring in general managers, and to fire GMs. He's going to have to change if the Panthers are going to have sustained success, which is what he said he wanted to bring to Carolina after parting ways with Ron Rivera. I think this is a step in the right direction to get a young, offensive-minded head coach in Dave Canales. He only has one season as a play caller, but if you look at the last 2 years, it's inarguable the job that he has done with Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield, both those quarterbacks throwing for career highs in passing yardage, passing touchdowns, completion percentage. He is someone who is now becoming known as a quarterback whisperer. And looking at Bryce Young being here in Carolina, the number one overall pick from last year's draft, and the struggles the Panthers had with Bryce and the overall offense this past year, finding someone who's been able to resurrect the careers of both Baker Mayfield, who was here last year in Carolina, and Geno Smith is exactly the type of personality that you want in Carolina. I hear so much about Dave Canales being a great communicator, a great leader, someone who's constantly positive, and knowing that this is still a full-on rebuild. He sounds like the perfect candidate for the Carolina Panthers to bring in here to work with Bryce Young, to work with this organization, and hopefully move them towards a direction of stability and winning games on football field on Sunday.
All right, Julian, you just touched on this, but here in Carolina, number one overall pick Bryce Young struggled in his rookie season. But as you mentioned, in Tampa Bay, Canales helped a former Panthers quarterback by the name of Baker Mayfield to his best season of his career. Do you think he can do the same for Young, or at least get him on the right path in year two?
I believe you can get him on the right path. It cannot be as bad as it was last year. Bryce Young can only go up, and you were able to see some of the flashes of brilliance that Bryce Young possessed at Alabama that led him to be the number one overall pick in the 2023 NFL draft. You look at the game against the Falcons, that game-winning drive in a driving rainstorm, the win against the Texans, a game-winning drive that afternoon. Then, of course, in the loss against the Green Bay Packers, where finally the passing game broke out, Bryce Young had multiple touchdown passes, over 300 yards passing. That is the Bryce Young that is capable of being the franchise quarterback here in Carolina. And Canales' experience is not limited to just Baker Mayfield. It's Geno Smith, as I mentioned. He spent time as a quarterback coach before Geno Smith with Russell Wilson in Seattle in 2018 and 2019. He has a wealth of experience working with quarterbacks and not much experience calling plays, but it cannot be as bad as it was this past year with Thomas Brown and Frank Reich tag teaming those duties as play callers for the Carolina Panthers. I think this is an excellent move for Bryce Young. And not to mention, too, Dave Canales from Southern California, Bryce Young from Southern California. I think that Southern Cali vibe should be able to mesh between those two and get them moving in the right direction, but in particular get Bryce Young moving in the right direction to potentially be the franchise quarterback in the long-term answer here in Carolina.
All right, I'm here for those SoCal vibes. And as you mentioned, first year for Dave Canales as a head coach, but a lot of the things we're hearing, it's the positive vibe, it's the attitude. So how does someone like Dave Canales come in his very first year as a head coach in the league and inspire this locker room that's been through so much, especially those veteran players that have been in Carolina? They've been through the Matt Rule era. They've now been through the Frank Reich era. How does he come in and really captivate them and motivate them to have a successful season in 2024?
Yeah, it's going to start with instilling confidence in Bryce Young first and foremost, then going to some of the leadership here in Carolina. If Brian Burns is going to stick around, of course, he's going to be a leader. Derek Brown had a career year last season. We'll see what happens with guys like Frankie Louvu once free agency rolls around. But finding the leaders on this team, instilling confidence in them. Because you can talk about players like Brian Burns, like Derek Brown, like Frankie Louvu that have been here through the majority, if not the entirety of their career in Carolina, and they have not been able to enjoy much success outside of the final 12 games of the season in 2022 when Steve Wilkes was the head coach here in Carolina. It's being able to get those guys to buy into what his belief is that this team can be. It's also going to be important to see what the staff is going to look like here in Carolina. Offensively, it's going to be a complete overhaul as Thomas Brown has been able to interview for OC jobs up in Chicago with the Bears. He's set to interview in Pittsburgh, interview for Tennessee Titans job. So he's out the door along with some other coaches that have already been fired. But defensively, is a guy like Ejiro Evero going to stick around, and the majority of his staff, are they going to stay around for next season where they were able to field a top 5 defense in terms of total yardage a season ago? That's the right step in the right direction. But really, I think for Dave Canales, it's being able to go in there and just change the culture in Carolina. It's always been about keep pounding. We've seen the last couple of head coaching cycles, whether it's been Matt Rule or Frank Reich, there doesn't seem to be much of an identity with this organization. The identity is keep pounding. It's not giving up. It's fighting through these adversities, and there's going to be plenty of the peaks and valleys over the next 12, 18 months with Dave Canales here in Carolina, assuming he makes it that far. I assume he will. But still, I think coming in with a positive attitude, identifying the key leadership, and being able to identify what is going to be this team identity offensively, defensively moving forward, that's going to be paramount to Dave Canales having success in 2024 and beyond here in Carolina.
All right, so now we know we have a new general manager in Dan Morgan and a new head coach in Dave Canales. What do you make of this duo, and is it a real step in the right direction?
The Dan Morgan hire was certainly interesting, considering that David Tepper went out and hired a search firm and then went down the hall to hire his general manager. I don't think it should have been all that surprising when the reports came out that Dan Morgan had been sitting in some of these head coaching interviews. And it's not like Dan Morgan doesn't have the credentials to be a general manager in the NFL. He started off as an intern in Seattle, spent 8 years actually with Dave Canales when he was in Seattle for 13 years, started off his career in the NFL. Then Dan Morgan went over to Buffalo to work with Brandon Beane, the former assistant general manager here in Carolina, who was homegrown, learned the salary cap, learned how to be a GM under former Panthers general manager 2 times around Marty Herney. Then he came down here to work with Scott Fitterer, who he had worked with in Seattle. Dan Morgan has been in winning organizations in Seattle, in Buffalo. He has seen what not to do with an organization here in Carolina, and he has the playing experience, having been a linebacker, of course, here for the Carolina Panthers. So he has a different perspective on how going about personnel, how commanding a room, making those decisions. I think it's a perfect marriage as far as two guys who already know each other and can now move forward on the same page. We talk all the time about alignment within organizations, and you can question how aligned the Panthers have been. There's still been plenty of talk about whether Frank Reich truly wanted Bryce Young, and the fact that there was any doubt about that is not a good thing. And Joe Person from The Athletic reported a year ago just the division that was sowed throughout that offensive coaching staff, because a lot of them weren't on the same page. Having alignment, having continuity, that is so important for the Carolina Panthers. I like the pairing of Dan Morgan and Dave Canales, but of course they have to go out there, get the right players, build the roster, win games on Sundays before we can find out whether it's truly a success. But I do think this is a step in the right direction for the Carolina Panthers as they move forward into this 2024 offseason.
Well, and the nice thing about Dan Morgan, a former Panther, he certainly knows that keep pounding culture that you mentioned. And now we have one key piece of the coaching staff that is a new head coach in Dave Canales. We'll see how the rest shakes out in the coming weeks. Julian, as always, we appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you.